There's a version of you that used to want things, that used to feel things, that used to believe your life could be different if you just tried hard enough. But somewhere along the way, that version of you got tired, and then it got quiet, and then it disappeared, and now you're what's left. Not sad, not broken, just blank. Like someone hollowed you out and left the shell walking around, going through motions you don't remember choosing, playing a part in a life that doesn't feel like yours. You're not depressed enough to call it depression. You're not desperate enough to ask for help. You're just gone. And the most terrifying part? You can't remember the last time you cared enough to want to come back. You're sitting at a red light. Your hands are on the wheel. The sun is coming through the windshield. There's a song playing, maybe one you used to love, and you feel nothing. Not bored, not peaceful, just absent. Like you're watching your life happen through glass. The light turns green, and you drive and you realize you don't remember deciding to go. Your body did it for you. And that's how everything feels now. You wake up and the first feeling isn't a feeling at all. It's the weight of another day you have to get through. Not survive, not live, just get through. You shower because you're supposed to. You eat because your body needs it. You smile when someone asks how you're doing because that's the script, and you've been reading from the script so long you don't even hear the words anymore. From the outside, you look like you have it together. You go to work, you pay your bills, you maintain relationships, but inside there's just this vast echoing emptiness, like a building where all the lights are on but no one's home. You used to think your choices mattered, that if you worked hard enough something would change, something would click. You'd finally feel like you were living instead of just existing. But at some point you realized, it doesn't matter how hard you try. You're just one person in a world of 8 billion people, and your individual choices are so small, so meaningless in the face of systems and structures and forces so much bigger than you that caring about them is like screaming into a hurricane and expecting it to change direction. So you stopped. Not dramatically, not with some big announcement or breakdown, you just stopped. Stopped trying so hard, stopped wanting so much, stopped believing that anything you do could actually make a difference. And here's what no one tells you. Giving up doesn't feel like giving up. It feels like growing up, like finally being realistic, finally understanding how the world actually works. You tell yourself you're not numb, you're just mature now. You're not disconnected, you're just responsible. You've got bills to pay and people depending on you and a life that requires you to function, so you function. And if functioning feels like sleepwalking, well, maybe that's just what adult life is. But late at night, when the performance is over and you're alone with yourself, you feel it. That absence, that hollowness. Not because someone else told you who to be, but because you chose safety over aliveness so many times that safety became your entire world. You made all the right choices, all the responsible ones, all the ones that kept a roof over your head and food on your table and your life intact. And somewhere in all that choosing, you stopped choosing the things that made you feel real. Here's the truth that will break you open if you let it. You didn't lose yourself because you made the wrong choices. You lost yourself because you only chose the safe ones. You chose to survive. You chose to be responsible. You chose to keep everything together. And those were the right choices. But somewhere along the way, you stopped choosing anything that felt uncertain or risky or fully alive. You stopped choosing the parts of yourself that couldn't be measured in productivity or stability. And now you're alive in every practical sense, but you're not living. If something in you just broke open, if you felt that, subscribe. This channel is for people who are tired of just surviving, tired of only choosing safety, tired of living half alive. This is for people who want to feel real again, even if they don't know how yet. And maybe you've been here before. Maybe you've felt this emptiness and tried to think your way out of it. Tried to logic yourself back into caring. Tried to convince yourself that if you just understood why you felt this way, the feeling would go away. But it didn't. Because this isn't a problem you can solve with understanding. This is a problem of the self. And the self doesn't respond to analysis. It responds to choice. The Danish philosopher Søren Kierkegaard spent his life studying this exact kind of death. Not physical death, spiritual death. The death that happens while you're still breathing. He called it despair. And he believed that most people are in despair without even knowing it. They're not crying or screaming or falling apart, they're just not themselves anymore, And they've been not themselves for so long they've forgotten there was ever another option. Kierkegaard said the self is not a thing you are, it's a relationship you have. A relationship between who you've been and who you're becoming. Between the infinite possibilities of what you could be and the finite reality of what you are. And that relationship requires constant choosing, constant engagement, constant becoming. The moment you stop choosing fully, the moment you stop engaging with that relationship, the self begins to die. Not loudly, quietly, like a fire going out in an empty room. But here's the complication. You haven't stopped choosing. You choose to go to work. You choose to pay your rent. You choose to keep your commitments. These are real choices, valid choices, necessary choices, but they're all choices from the same narrow corridor, the corridor of necessity, the corridor of survival, the corridor of what you have to do to keep your life from falling apart. This is what Kierkegaard called the despair of necessity. It's the despair that comes from believing you have no real choice, that your life is fixed, determined, already written by the demands of survival. And maybe you're right. Maybe the bills do have to get paid. Maybe the job does have to get done. Maybe you don't have the luxury of choosing anything else, but somewhere in that pattern the self starts to suffocate. Because the self isn't just about surviving, it's about becoming. And you can't become when all your choices are about maintaining, when all your energy goes toward keeping things stable. You look around at the world and see systems so big, structures so entrenched, that your individual choices feel like nothing. You're just a cog in a machine, just a number in a database. And Kierkegaard would say, this is exactly what the world wants you to believe. He wrote about the crowd, the public, this abstract, leveling force that turns individuals into categories. That makes you feel small and interchangeable and powerless. Modern life creates this reflective despair, where you're so aware of how meaningless your individual existence seems that you stop trying to exist as an individual at all. You become a demographic, a user, a data point. You scroll through feeds of people living lives that look more real than yours, and you feel yourself shrinking, not because their lives are actually better, but because the comparison itself makes you disappear. You just blend in, disappear into the crowd, and you tell yourself, this is wisdom, this is realism, this is just how it is. But listen to what he says. The greatest danger, that of losing oneself, can pass off as quietly as if it were nothing. Every other loss, that of an arm, a leg, $5, a wife, is sure to be noticed. You can lose yourself and not even know it. You can stop being yourself and think it's called maturity. You can die on the inside while looking perfectly alive on the outside. And no one will tell you, because everyone around you is doing the same thing. Kierkegaard identified different forms of despair, different ways the self refuses to be itself. And the one you're experiencing right now, this numbness, this apathy, this blank emptiness, he would call the despair of weakness. It's when you're so exhausted by the weight of being yourself that you stop choosing anything that requires vulnerability, anything that requires risk, anything that might not work out. You still choose, but only where nothing can hurt you, and it works until it doesn't. Because the self doesn't just need safety, it needs possibility, it needs risk, it needs to choose things that might fail, things that might hurt, things that might matter in ways you can't control or predict. And the cruelest part? This despair often feels like relief, like peace. When you only choose safe things, you stop getting hurt in certain ways. You stop being disappointed. You stop being vulnerable to failure. It's a kind of self-protection that looks like wisdom, and it works for a while. But what you've protected yourself from isn't just pain. It's life, all of it. You've traded your aliveness for safety, and you've convinced yourself it was a fair trade, that you didn't have another option, that this is just what responsible people do. Kierkegaard writes, "The despairing person is not aware of being in despair." In this form of despair, a person has lost themselves entirely, and they don't even know they've lost themselves. You're living, but you're not present. You're choosing, but you're not really choosing. You're moving through life, hitting all the marks, doing all the things, maintaining all the structures, and nothing in the routine tells you that anything is wrong. Until one day, maybe today, maybe right now, you feel it. just for a second. That absence, that hollowness, that sense that you've been keeping yourself alive but you haven't been letting yourself live. And here's the thing that makes this so hard to face. You can't blame anyone else for this. You made these choices. They were your choices. Good choices even, smart choices, the kind that kept you standing when other people fell apart. But they were all choices that kept you safe. And safety, over time, over years of choosing only safety, becomes a prison. A comfortable prison you built yourself, one reasonable decision at a time, and you're so tired. Not the kind of tired that sleep fixes. The kind of tired that comes from holding yourself together when every part of you wants to fall apart. The kind of tired that comes from performing stability when you feel like you're disappearing. You're exhausted from being reasonable, from being responsible, from being the person who doesn't fall apart. And here's what makes this unbearable. You did everything right. You made all the choices you were supposed to make. You took care of yourself in every practical way. You chose responsibility over recklessness. You chose stability over chaos. You chose to keep your life together when it would have been easy to let it fall apart. And you should be proud of that. But somewhere in all that choosing, you forgot that survival isn't the same as living. That keeping yourself safe isn't the same as keeping yourself whole. You've been choosing yourself in every practical sense, but you stopped choosing the parts of yourself that can't be justified by necessity. The parts that are wild and uncertain and impossible to explain. The parts that make you feel alive. And maybe that's the worst part, that there's no villain in this story, no one to blame, no moment where you can point and say, that's where I lost myself. It happened gradually. So how do you come back? How do you return to yourself when every choice you've made has been pulling you away? Kierkegaard's answer is brutal and beautiful. You choose differently. Right now, in the numbness, in the fog, you choose something that isn't safe, something that isn't necessary, something that exists only because you want it to exist. Because here's the secret. The self doesn't return when you finally feel like yourself again. The self returns when you choose something that's true to who you are, even when you can't feel it yet, even when it seems pointless, even when every practical part of you is screaming that this doesn't matter. This is what Kierkegaard called the leap of faith. Not about religion, though that was part of it for him, but faith in the possibility that you are more than just your survival. Faith that you can choose something beyond necessity, and it will matter, even if you can't see how yet. Listen to this. Life can only be understood backwards, but it must be lived forwards. You can't think your way back to meaning. You can't analyze your way out of numbness. You can't wait for the feeling to return before you act. You have to move. You have to choose. You have to act in the dark without knowing if it will work, without proof that it matters. But here's what happens when you choose something beyond necessity. You become real again, even if just for a moment. You stop being just a survivor. You stop being just a function. You start being a self again. A self that exists not just to maintain but to become. And the world might not care. The systems might not change. The bills will still need to be paid. But you'll notice. Your soul will notice. Because this isn't about abandoning responsibility. This isn't about burning your life down. This is about expanding the range of what you're willing to choose. About letting yourself want something that isn't justified by necessity. About choosing one thing, just one thing, that makes you feel alive, instead of just keeping you alive. About remembering that you are not just a collection of obligations. You are a self. And the self needs more than survival to exist. Kierkegaard would say, you can be responsible and alive. You can pay your bills and still choose things that matter beyond the bills. You can take care of your life and still take care of your soul. But you have to choose both. You can't just choose safety and expect aliveness to show up on its own. You have to reach for it. You have to risk it. You choose anyway. Not because it will make everything better, not because it will solve your problems, but because choosing something beyond survival is what makes you real. Meaning doesn't come back with thinking. It comes back with motion. So here's what you do, not tomorrow, right now, while this is still raw. First, choose one thing today that has nothing to do with keeping your life together. Not something productive, not something responsible, something that exists only because you want it to exist. 10 minutes playing music, drawing something pointless, going somewhere you don't need to go just because you want to see it. It doesn't have to matter to anyone else, it just has to be something you choose that isn't required. Second, catch yourself performing and stop. Just once today. The role of the responsible one, the capable one, the one who's fine, who's handling it. Those roles are keeping you functional, but they're also keeping you numb. So notice them. Ask yourself, am I choosing this or am I just doing what's expected? And if you're just going through the motions, stop. Let there be silence. Let there be awkwardness. It will feel terrifying. Do it anyway. Third, choose something that might not work, something uncertain. Reaching out to someone you've been too afraid to reach out to. Starting something you've been putting off because you're not sure you'll be good at it. The point isn't to succeed. The point is to choose something where the outcome isn't guaranteed, where you might fail, where you have to risk feeling something, because risk is where the self lives. Kierkegaard spent his entire life trying to teach people one thing. The self is not a fact. It's a project. You don't find yourself once and then you're done. You become yourself over and over every single day. And when you stop becoming, you start disappearing. But the opposite is also true. When you start choosing beyond necessity, even in the smallest ways, you start becoming real again. You are not broken. You are not too far gone. You are in despair, yes. But despair is not the end. Despair is the signal. It's your soul screaming at you that survival isn't enough. That the practical choices that kept you alive aren't the same as the choices that make you feel alive. And now you have a choice. You can stay here, in this numbness, in this safety. Or you can choose one thing that isn't required, one thing that's uncertain, one thing that makes you vulnerable, one thing that reminds you that you're more than just responsibilities and obligations. You don't have to have it all figured out. You don't have to know what comes next. You don't have to fix everything today. You just have to take one step back toward yourself. One choice that says, I'm still here. I still matter. I still deserve to feel alive. The self is waiting, buried under all the practical choices and careful considerations. It's waiting, and all you have to do is reach for it. If this spoke to you, tell me in the comments what you're choosing. Not tomorrow, today, right now. What's the one thing you're going to do that isn't required, that isn't safe, that's just true? And if you're still here, still listening, still trying to find your way back, walk this path with me. With all of us who are trying to wake up. The self is waiting. Choose it.